My name is Vanessa Quinn, and the first thing I remember about that morning is the way the courtroom floor shone like a calm pond after rain. Seattle Superior Court smelled of wood polish and damp coats and the whisper of careful shoes. I stood beside my attorney, Morgan Blake, and he kept one hand on our file as if the weight of paper could keep a pulse steady. Across the aisle, my sister Elise adjusted her blazer and flashed the gallery a warm smile that did not reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile people practice in bathroom mirrors when they believe the ending already belongs to them. The judge looked over the rim of her glasses and asked for the next exhibit. Morgan nodded, reached for the small recorder on counsel table, and pressed play. The click was soft yet final. A thin veil of static, a scrape of a chair, then a voice. It was Elise. Vanessa is too soft to notice I just renamed her files. The line moved through the room like cold air under a door. A rustle rose on the benches and then stopped itself. The bailiff lifted his head. The judge made no move at all. I felt the muscles in my jaw loosen, not with relief, but with recognition. That was the line I had carried like a stone for months, and now it belonged to everyone in the room. A reporter near the aisle leaned toward another and whispered, "Is that her own voice?" The microphone on the recorder caught even that a faint ribbon of breath proof that the room itself was listening. Elise tugged at her collar and tried for another smile, but the frame of her face could not hold it. "Your Honor, she said that recording has been edited." Her tone reached for calm and found an edge. Morgan did not turn his head. "Then let us play the rest." He tapped the button again. A new clip opened like a door that had been waiting to move. Music in the background glasses clinking the blur of a networking event. Elise again, brighter, almost buoyant. "I sent the package out last night. She said investors love a clean story and nobody needs to know where it began." A man asked what she meant by clean. Elise laughed quick and pleased with herself. "I already sold a portion," she said, before she even noticed anything, and if she does, I will say I managed the whole thing. The laughter rang thin against the paneled walls and slid away. Morgan stopped the audio and let silence arrive on its own feet. The judge lifted one hand. "Counsel, continue." Morgan pressed play once more. This time there was no party, only a quiet room and Elise speaking low. "If she pushes back, we freeze her out. She said she does not have the stomach for a fight." Then a pause and the line I had heard in my sleep. I changed the file names and used my initials on the drafts. People see what you show them. The clip ended with a soft click, the kind a person might miss during lunch, and yet nobody in that room missed it. Elise sat very still. The color in her face stepped backward. She looked toward the gallery and then away. In the second row, my parents sat side by side, hands folded, the picture of steady concern that had not been present when it would have mattered. My father studied the floor as if an answer might be printed there. My mother pressed her lips into a careful line and kept them there until the color fled. They did not stand. They did not speak. There was nothing they could say that would sound like truth. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it is a single red light on a small device and the room around it forgetting how to breathe. The judge set down her pen and looked from Morgan to Elise. "Ms. Quinn," she said, "do you dispute that the voice on these recordings is yours?" Elise cleared her throat. The microphone turned her breath into paper. "I do not recall," she said. The words fell apart as they arrived. Morgan opened the file and drew out a slim chain of custody log. "Your Honor." He said the provenance records match each statement to file metadata uploaded by my client months before any transmission by Miss Elise Quinn. The names and timestamps are in the record. He paused and let the room understand the word record. I watched the seal above the bench. Instead of Elise, watched the eagle hold its own weight as if patience were a kind of muscle. I thought of the first day I showed Elise a sketch at my kitchen table, the steam from the kettle fogging the window, my pride warm and simple. I thought of the afternoon the preliminary agreement slid across a polished desk and came back with my name in ink. I thought of how easily family can turn a word like help into a key that opens the wrong door. The judge asked if there was anything further for this exhibit. "There is one clip left," Morgan said. He pressed play and a door clicked shut inside the speakers. Elise again. "If she ever wakes up to what I did, it will be too late." She laughed, then a short sound that ended as if it met a wall. The judge raised her hand. "That is sufficient." The quiet that followed did not feel empty. It felt measured like a glass set carefully on a table that used to shake. Elise held the edge of her chair and looked smaller than the jacket she wore. The reporter lowered his phone. The bailiff watched the air as if it might move on its own. I kept my hand still and counted my breath to 4, and then to 4 again, and found that I could keep it. If your own family betrayed you, would you still call them family? I did not ask it out loud. I kept it for later, for the people who would hear this story and weigh it against the weight they carry in their own homes. The judge called a brief recess for the chain of custody summary. People stood and sat again in the wrong order. Outside, a bus sighed and drew away from the curb. Inside, the red light on the recorder went dark. The room stayed silent. We were not finished. We had only begun. April in Seattle carries a kind of cautious optimism. The rain pauses just enough for people to believe summer might actually exist. That month, I stood on the 26th floor of Rainfield Biotech, watching the skyline glow gold in the afternoon light. My inbox held a confirmation email from CentraMed. $10 million. The deal was signed, the years of late nights finally worth something tangible. I leaned against the glass wall and let the moment sink in. I should have felt nothing but pride. Instead, I thought about who I would call first. My parents would congratulate me, of course, but I knew they would also ask how Elise was doing. They always did. Elise Quinn, my older sister by 3 years, had a talent for turning every conversation into an orbit around her. She was out of work again, living in our old family house in Linwood, and still bragging about the marketing job she had quit in California 8 years ago. It was too toxic, she used to say, even though everyone knew she had been fired. Still, she managed to carry herself like someone who had retired from success rather than been escorted away from it. That evening, she showed up at my apartment with a bottle of wine wrapped in tissue paper. "For my brilliant little sister," she said, placing it on the counter with a flourish. I smiled and took the bottle, reading the faded label. It was from 2018, the cork slightly discolored. "You know this expired 3 years ago, right?" I said, laughing. Elise waved her hand dismissively. "Wine gets better with age. It's symbolic. Symbolic of what botulism." She rolled her eyes, then leaned against the counter, her perfectly manicured nails tapping. "So, how big is this deal, really? It's big," I said carefully, keeping my voice even. "CentraMed's funding the prototype phase." "And what do you get?" she asked, pretending to sound casual. "Equity bonus." "What's your slice of that pie?" I hesitated. The truth was, my payout was substantial, more than I had ever made in my career. But I didn't like the gleam in her eyes, the way curiosity sharpened into calculation. "Enough," I said. "I'm comfortable." "Comfortable," she repeated, smiling as if testing the word. "You always did play it safe." I tried to change the subject. "How's the job search going?" She sighed dramatically. "Companies don't appreciate experience anymore. They want kids who live on caffeine and delusion." I nodded, though she wasn't really looking for empathy. She was scanning my apartment, the new furniture, the framed patent certificate on the wall. Her gaze landed on the small stack of papers on the table, the CentraMed contract, half hidden under a folder. "That the big deal?" she asked, walking closer. "Just paperwork," I said quickly, covering it with another file. "It's confidential." She smiled, a flash of teeth too bright to be warm. "Relax, I'm not going to steal your secrets." I laughed politely. "Good. They're encrypted anyway." She chuckled, then poured herself a glass of the expired wine and sniffed it suspiciously. "Maybe I should start inventing things too," she said. "Seems easy enough. You'd have to stick with something for more than 6 months," I teased. She grinned, but there was no humor in it. "Touché." We drank the questionable wine, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe it was a normal evening between sisters. We talked about childhood, our parents' old house, the dog we used to fight over walking. But beneath the laughter, there was a quiet strain. Every time I mentioned the project, she leaned in a little closer, asking just one more question. What does it do exactly? Who else is on your team? Is it patented yet? Each question landed like a pin against glass. I told myself she was just proud, just curious. Later when she left, I stood at the doorway and watched her walk down the hall, her heels clicking like punctuation marks, to a story I hadn't started reading yet. She turned once and smiled. "You're lucky, Vanessa. Some of us never get our big break." I smiled back. "You'll find yours." She nodded, but something flickered across her face. "Maybe I'll borrow yours if you're not careful." We laughed, and it sounded harmless at the time. After she left, I rinsed the half-empty glasses and poured the rest of the wine down the sink. The smell was sour, metallic wrong. I thought of her parting words and brushed them off as another one of her jokes. I wish I hadn't. Sometimes the first betrayal doesn't sound like a lie. It sounds like laughter. Have you ever laughed with someone not realizing they were already calculating what's yours? The email from CentraMed had still been open on my laptop that morning when Elise called. She said she was downtown and thought she might stop by Rainfield because she had a tiny favor. I should have known that whenever she said tiny, it meant something messy. She arrived an hour later wearing sunglasses inside the lobby, carrying a paper cup that said oat milk but smelled like champagne. She waved at the receptionist as if she were returning to an office that had missed her. I was finishing a layout for the final presentation to CentraMed, my 10th revision of the slide deck that might seal a $10 million contract. Elise leaned over the cubicle wall and said cheerfully, "I just need to polish a few slides for this Women in Innovation thing. Could you lend me a flash drive? I promise I'll only need it an hour." I hesitated. My desktop was a battlefield of files and prototypes, but my head was full of deadlines, and I wanted her to leave before my supervisor returned from lunch. So I handed her a silver drive that I thought held only a sample deck for formatting reference. It was the one labeled RFB Pitch Final. I did not notice the second folder beneath it labeled Concept Prototype Master. She grinned and said, "You're the best," and left humming the theme song from some startup podcast. I forgot about it until later that night when my phone buzzed. A message from Elise glowed on the screen. "Thanks, love, I printed everything. The slides look so professional!" Exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Attached was a selfie of her at a coffee shop, the flash drive next to a stack of papers, all stamped with the Rainfield logo. I remember staring at the picture, thinking maybe she just used the template. Maybe nothing else was on it. I went back to work. The next afternoon, while I was eating noodles at my desk, a colleague named Priya sent me a link. "Hey, is this your sister?" she wrote. The link opened to a live stream from a local startup meetup, a banner reading Seattle Innovators Network glowing behind a stage. Elise stood there, microphone in hand, hair curled, wearing my old navy blazer. The caption on the stream read, "AI Healing Device Demo" by Elise Quinn. I felt the noodles turn cold. She was saying words I had written, phrases like adaptive biometric loop patient responsive calibration, all delivered with her bright stage smile. I stared as she pulled out a 3D printed shell I had left in my work drawer months ago. She held it up and said, "We designed this to improve recovery rates by 40%. We." My stomach clenched. The audience clapped politely. The moderator asked about her co-founder. Elise laughed. "She's shy," she said, "more of a back-end genius." My phone buzzed again, another message from Priya Vanessa. "This is insane. Are you there?" I was already standing. Rainfield's office was 10 blocks from the community center. I walked fast, then faster, rehearsing what I might say and what I might not. By the time I reached the hall, the presentation was ending. I heard her voice through the doors, thanking the sponsors, calling herself a visionary. I pushed the door open just as the audience started to applaud. Elise saw me first. For a fraction of a second, her smile cracked, then reassembled itself with astonishing speed. "Oh, look," she said into the microphone. "My sister's here." Everyone turned. She helps me with the back-end stuff, Elise added with a laugh that sounded almost affectionate. The room chuckled. I felt my own mouth curl into something like a smile because the alternative was a scream. I walked to the front row and sat. She finished the talk with a flourish, announced that her prototype had drawn investor interest, and bowed slightly. The applause came again. When the moderator invited questions, a man asked about patent filings. Elise answered smoothly. We're in the final stage with our legal team. She had no legal team. She had my flash drive. Afterward, she walked down from the stage, arms open for a hug, whispering, "Just play along, sis, it's networking." I whispered back, "The back end you mentioned, is that my ethics or my code?" She blinked, lips parting just enough to show she had no quick answer. People milled around us, shaking hands, collecting cards, telling her she was inspiring. One woman said, "It's wonderful to see sisters collaborating." Elise nodded graciously. "We've always been a team," she said. I laughed short and sharp, and everyone mistook it for pride. She slipped an arm through mine and steered me toward the refreshment table, murmuring, "Don't make a scene." There was lemonade in plastic cups, a plate of crackers, a stack of flyers with her name. I picked one up and looked at it. The logo was my design, slightly altered. She had kept the font, changed the color, and added her initials to the bottom right corner. She said, "You're good at branding, you should do more of it." I answered, "You're good at theft, you should do less." Her smile wavered. A photographer asked for a picture. She gripped my arm and faced the lens. Somewhere behind us, a light flashed. I smiled again, but inside I felt the first small shift, the one that comes before a storm. On the way out, she called after me, "Don't be mad, it's just exposure, you'll benefit too." I did not answer. That night, I watched the recording again. The comments section was full of congratulations. One said, "Elise, you're a genius." Another said, "This could change everything." I closed the laptop and sat in the dark until the clock turned midnight. Somewhere between disbelief and laughter, a quiet thought arrived. We laughed. I shouldn't have. Have you ever laughed with someone not realizing they were already calculating what's yours? The invitation came printed on thick ivory paper with gold edges, the kind Elise used when she wanted to look successful. It read, "Celebration Dinner for Quinn Innovations, July 16, 2022. The word innovations made my teeth clench. I had told her I did not want to come, but our mother called twice saying, "She is your sister, Vanessa, show some grace." I showed up at the Bellevue restaurant anyway, wearing a navy dress I had bought years ago for client meetings. The place was loud with clinking glasses and over-polished laughter. Elise stood near the window, radiant in a red dress, accepting congratulations as if she had discovered electricity. She saw me and waved a queen, acknowledging her reluctant subject. Our parents sat beside her, smiling too wide. "You must be so proud of your sister's success," Aunt Marianne said before I could even sit down. She squeezed my arm. "She's putting the Quinn name on the map." I smiled tightly and looked at Elise, who was talking animatedly about our prototype to a man I recognized from LinkedIn. The waiter poured wine, and I noticed the label. The bottle was the same expired 2018 vintage she had given me as a congratulatory gift months ago. She had regifted her own failure to the whole family. Halfway through dinner, Mom leaned over and whispered, "We're so happy for both of you. Your father and I even made a little investment to show support." I frowned. Investment? She nodded proudly. $5,000. Elise said you approved taking it from your savings, since it's a joint project. My fork froze. My savings were in a separate account. When I checked my phone under the table, the banking app confirmed the withdrawal. The note on the transaction read, "Transfer to EQ Start LLC." My chest tightened. The password used was the old family one, the one Elise had helped me set up years ago. Quinn Family 2020. I looked up and saw Elise raising her glass for a toast. "To family," she said. Everyone cheered. I took a sip and tasted metal. My cousin whispered, "You should learn from Aunt Elise, she's the business genius." I almost laughed. The irony was too perfect. She didn't steal my idea, I thought. She just stole the parts of me that made it real. Dessert arrived in the shape of a white chocolate sculpture shaped like a light bulb. Elise clapped her hands and said, "Innovation never tasted so sweet." The table erupted in laughter. I wanted to leave, but Dad started telling the story of how Elise had always been the ambitious one, while I liked quiet things. He said it fondly, but it landed like a verdict. Elise's phone buzzed mid-dessert. She looked down, read a message, and stood abruptly. "Excuse me, everyone," she said, stepping aside. I watched her expression shift from giddy to triumphant. She returned moments later, eyes bright, trying to hide her smile but failing. "Investor confirmed," she said breathlessly. $10 million valuation. Applause exploded around the table. Mom teared up. "Oh, sweetheart, we always knew you'd make it." I sat there smiling like a statue, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. She had sent Centramed the copied contract. That was the only way she could have reached that valuation. When the waiter refilled my glass, I said softly, "Make it water, please." Elise leaned over, voice dripping with false humility. "I know this is weird for you, but think of it this way, we both win. Family brand, shared glory." I looked at her. "Family brand," I said quietly. "You mean theft in high heels?" She blinked. "You always make things so dramatic. You always make them dishonest." She sighed and turned to entertain another compliment. A young nephew approached me shyly with a napkin asking for an autograph. "Mom says you're the tech wizard behind the scenes," he said. "Can you sign my napkin so I can sell it when you're both famous?" I signed it, writing 2 words under my name backend, "Ethics." He giggled and ran off. The dinner dragged on. Elise's laughter grew louder, her stories more inflated. She told one about how she pitched alone in a male-dominated boardroom. I wanted to correct her to say the only boardroom she had entered was the one on the startup livestream, but I stayed quiet. I watched her bask in stolen light and realized silence was my last shred of dignity. As the plates cleared, Dad asked me to take a family photo. I stood behind the camera, focusing the lens while they posed. Elise pulled Mom and Dad close, chin tilted high. "Say legacy," she chirped. I pressed the button. The flash caught her mid-grin eyes gleaming with victory. Later that night at home, I checked the contract version history. My suspicion turned into confirmation. The file she had used to pitch was the same one from my flash drive with my initials scraped off and replaced by hers. $10 million. $10 million and my trust. I sat by the window, the city lights blurring into streaks through the glass, and whispered the words like a confession. She didn't steal my idea. She stole the parts of me that made it real. Have you ever watched someone get rewarded for your own work? The night was already heavy with the kind of August air that sticks to your skin when I parked outside Elise's townhouse. The porch light was on and her car gleamed in the driveway like it belonged to someone honest. I had told myself I would keep my voice steady, that I only wanted to talk to find some reason for what she had done. But the contract copies, the stolen savings, the laughter at dinner, they all clung to me like wet fabric. When she opened the door, her face flickered with annoyance instead of guilt. "Vanessa," she said, "you look like a ghost." I stepped inside. The house smelled of candles and triumph. On the dining table sat her laptop open to an email thread labeled Investor Follow-Up. "You copied my prototype," I said quietly. "You sent it to Centramed." She gave a little shrug like someone caught taking an extra cookie. "You're emotional, Vanessa. That's why people don't take you seriously." The words sliced cleaner than I expected. "You stole my work," I said. "It's not stealing when family shares ideas. Ideas don't come with shared passwords," I said. "You emptied my savings." "It was an investment," she replied, eyes glinting. "Mom said you'd understand." I took a step closer. "Stop using Mom as cover. You lied." Her tone cooled further. "And you think this tone will get you what you want." No wonder they gave me the meeting instead. The anger that rose in me felt ancient, something buried from childhood arguments and forgotten birthdays. "You always think you can fix everything with charm," I said. "But charm can't rewrite code or contracts." She rolled her eyes. "Here we go again. Saint Vanessa, the underappreciated genius." She turned toward the stairs. "I have an investor call. You should go." I followed her. You don't get to walk away from this." She stopped halfway up the steps, turned and said, "Then what you'll sue me, you'll embarrass yourself." Her voice echoed off the narrow walls. "You won't because you're too soft." I took another step and something in me snapped louder than my patience. "Soft doesn't mean weak," I said. She laughed. "Sure looks like it." I reached for the railing as she tried to brush past me. Our shoulders collided. My foot slipped. For a moment, I saw the ceiling tilt, the world blur, then wood against my wrist, pain sharp enough to silence thought. I hit the floor at the base of the stairs, breath knocked out, wrist twisted wrong. Elise stood frozen for 2 seconds, then sighed as if I had inconvenienced her. "Oh my God," she said without emotion. "You really should be more careful." I cradled my arm. "You pushed me. You tripped," she said. "You always dramatize everything." She crouched down, eyes scanning my arm. "It's probably just sprained. Next time, use your left hand for paperwork." She said it lightly, almost joking, and the cruelty hid behind the casualness. Then she walked to the kitchen phone in hand, murmuring something about calling someone for advice, but never dialing. I sat there until the room stopped spinning, then used the wall to pull myself up and drove to the hospital alone. The triage nurse asked what happened. I said I fell. Saying anything else felt like feeding a wound instead of closing it. The X-ray confirmed a fracture. They wrapped my wrist in white plaster that glowed under the fluorescent light. I stared at it and thought of all the prototypes I had drawn, all the files I had coded, line by line. My right hand, the one that had built everything, was now useless. When I got home, a message waited on my phone. From Elise. The screen showed the words without punctuation, the way she always texted when she wanted to sound casual. "Don't drag this, sis. Let's keep family peace." I stared at it until the letters blurred. Peace. She used the word like a threat. The cast came off in late September, and with it went the last illusion that I could still pretend nothing had happened. My wrist was stiff, my job had quietly reassigned my project to another designer, and the headlines about Elise's company were everywhere. She was on a morning show, smiling under bright studio lights, explaining her invention to a cheerful host. I watched it from my couch with a bowl of cereal that had gone soggy. My sister helped test early versions. Elise said, voice full of practiced humility. She's always been supportive. The host smiled. Family teamwork, how wonderful. Elise nodded, perfectly framed by the studio camera. I muted the television and laughed out loud, a sound that didn't feel like humor at all. That afternoon, I opened a blank TikTok account and filmed something simple. The camera showed my wrist brace, a bottle of pain medication, and a glass of wine. A voiceover said, "How to lose a sister in $10 million. Step 1, lend her a flash drive. Step 2, let her trademark your soul." I ended it with a raised eyebrow and the caption, "Fiction, of course." I uploaded it at midnight, not expecting anything. By morning, it had 200,000 views and thousands of comments. Some called it relatable. Others asked for a part 2. A few said, "Girl, sue her." The algorithm had turned my private ache into public entertainment. Elise called within hours. "What the hell is that?" she demanded. "Take it down." "Why?" I asked. "It's fiction. Like your career." She inhaled sharply. "You're sabotaging me." "You already did that yourself," I said. "I'm just narrating." She hung up. That night, another video surfaced, not from me this time, but from someone who had recognized her. A tech blogger stitched my clip with a recording of her TV segment and said, "Interesting how the fiction and the interview share identical phrasing." The comments exploded. Within a week, one of her smaller investors announced a review of her IP claims. Elise posted a defensive message on LinkedIn about toxic misinformation. I read it while waiting in line for coffee and nearly smiled. At work, Priya whispered, "Is it true?" I shrugged. "It's complicated." She said, "If it's true, it's brilliant." The strange thing was how loneliness began to feel lighter once the truth started leaking. I no longer felt invisible. I felt like a quiet storm moving through digital air. By early October, Elise's PR consultant quit. An article hinted that her prototype design files had unclear provenance. She texted again. "Are you happy now?" I typed back, "Not yet." For the first time since July, I slept 8 full hours. Revenge. It turned out didn't need fire. It only needed patience and Wi-Fi. A week later, Mom called to say Elise was under a lot of stress and maybe I should stop the videos. I told her I had stopped. It was true. The internet had taken over for me. Memes appeared. Someone made a remix of my audio with dramatic piano music. I watched it once, then turned off notifications. I didn't want fame. I wanted quiet acknowledgement from the universe that I hadn't been crazy. One evening, while scrolling news feeds, I found a new post from Elise. It read, "Women should support each other, not tear each other down." The irony was so sharp, I laughed until tears came. When I finally caught my breath, I whispered to myself, that was my first return. November arrived cold and clean, the kind of air that makes truth easier to breathe. I walked into the office of Morgan Blake with a folder clutched under my arm and a quiet desperation that felt more like focus than fear. The building was all glass and gray light. Morgan looked up from her desk glasses balanced on her head, the kind of woman who carried authority the way others carried perfume. She shook my hand and said, "This isn't about money. It's about record." The sentence landed like a diagnosis. I nodded. She took everything I said, but the files are mine. She gestured for me to sit. Then we find proof of authorship. Digital footprints don't lie unless you let them. For the next hour, we combed through my old Rainfield laptop. The hum of her computer filled the silence like steady breathing. Each document leaves metadata. She explained timestamps, version history, embedded authorship tags. Think of it as DNA. I watched as she opened my project folder. The main file still carried the signature I had coded into its core, the tagline, VQ Origin. She smiled slightly. "That's your fingerprint. Beautiful work." I felt something close to pride flicker through the exhaustion. Then she opened the copy Elise had sent to CentraMed. The metadata had been altered, the date shifted by 24 hours, my tag removed. She tried to rewrite the timeline, Morgan murmured, but she didn't understand the redundancy log. She pulled up the Rainfield server records. There it was, a timestamp showing my upload at 9:42 a.m. on May 12th, followed by an external access at 9:44. 2 minutes apart, she said. She copied right after you did. The precision of it made my stomach turn. "Can we prove it?" I asked. She looked at me. "We just did." She printed the logs, stapled them neatly, and said, "We will build quietly. Let her keep performing until the stage collapses." Her calm steadiness made me exhale for the first time in months. When I left her office, the sky had turned pink over the city. I stopped at a corner store, bought a small silver USB drive, and wrapped it in brown paper with a white ribbon. Inside, I placed a single note that read, "You forgot to erase your trail." The next morning, I mailed it to Elise's office. No return address. Later that week, I got a text from her. "What's this supposed to mean?" I didn't reply. Instead, I met Morgan again to review the next steps. She said, once CentraMed realizes the files were altered, they'll freeze negotiations. I said, "You think they'll believe me?" She smiled. "They'll believe the math. Computers don't pick sides." It was the first time I realized justice could look like code instead of fire. When I walked home that evening, the city lights reflected on wet pavement, and for the first time since the fall, I caught myself almost smiling. Elise would never see the message coming, not in words, but in numbers that spoke louder than any apology. January came with headlines sharper than winter air. Elise had hired a PR firm that specialized in image rehabilitation, the kind that polished villains into victims. The first article appeared in a local business magazine. Its headline read, "The Pressure of Success, Inside the Mind of Elise Quinn." The story painted her as a fragile innovator battling family jealousy. It quoted an unnamed source claiming I had become unstable after losing professional ground. I read it twice, not from disbelief, but from morbid curiosity. She had managed to turn theft into sympathy. When my phone buzzed that afternoon, it was Morgan. "They're baiting you," she said. "Don't respond directly. We build higher ground." That same night, an email arrived from a journalist producing a podcast called Women in STEM Betrayed by Family. He had seen my viral TikTok and wanted to hear my version. Morgan leaned back in her chair during our meeting and said, "Do it, but keep it clean. Facts are your armor." I agreed, partly out of exhaustion and partly out of something sharper. The interview took place in a modest studio in downtown Seattle. The host, a calm woman named Harper, asked about ambition, family, and betrayal. I answered softly, avoiding names, but using enough detail that anyone paying attention could connect the dots. When she asked how it felt to have my work stolen, I said, "It feels like watching someone break into your house while convincing the neighbors you gave them the key." The episode aired 2 weeks later under the title The Quiet Inventor Who Fought Back. It climbed to 400,000 views on YouTube in 3 days. Comments flooded in. Some were angry, some compassionate, but most were united in outrage. Hashtags began trending. One said, "D Justice for Vanessa." Another said, "D Family Fraud." Elise posted a statement calling the podcast a smear campaign. It only made things worse. People began dissecting her interviews, comparing her technical explanations to mine noticing inconsistencies. A popular tech blogger titled his video, "The Math Doesn't Add Up." The digital tide shifted. One morning, while sipping coffee, I saw a meme circulating online. It showed a photo of Elise on stage beside the caption, "When you copy your sister's homework, but she becomes the teacher." I laughed so hard I spilled the coffee. Later that day, my inbox pinged with an email from Elise. The subject line read, "Can we stop this?" The message said, "We're sisters, not enemies." Attached was a meme of 2 cartoon cats hugging with glitter text saying "family over fights." I stared at it for a long second before forwarding it to Morgan with 1-sentence drafting reply. Morgan responded, "Send me a copy before you do and make it clean." I typed my response anyway. It contained no greeting, no emotion. I attached a photo of the legal invoice for $23,000 and wrote one line under it. "That's how much peace costs." I hit send. Morgan called an hour later, laughing quietly. "That," she said, "is how you bill emotional labor." The next week, reporters reached out to me instead of her. One from a national network asked if I was ready to show documentation. Morgan and I spent evenings in her office sorting through evidence, lining up digital logs and signatures. "You don't win by shouting," she said. "You win by showing." I nodded, feeling the old fire return in controlled doses. The funny thing about public disgrace is how it tastes like balance when you've been silent too long. I started getting messages from women in tech stories of stolen ideas, false partners, credit taken by louder voices. I answered every one until my inbox overflowed. The story had stopped being just mine. It had become a mirror for everyone who had been quietly erased. Elise stopped posting for a while. Then one evening she tried a different tactic. She uploaded a video of herself crying softly, saying she had been misunderstood and that the online hate was ruining her health. The comments were not kind. One user wrote, "If guilt were measurable, it would fund her next startup." I should have felt pity. I didn't. I only felt equilibrium, as if the universe had finally adjusted its scale. When Morgan called to discuss the next step, she said, "The PR facade is cracking. CentraMed is reviewing her credentials. That's our opening." I looked at the window reflecting the city skyline and said, "Then we're close," she replied. Closer than she thinks. That night before shutting my laptop, I searched for my own name. The first page of results no longer mentioned Elise's company. It was filled with articles about intellectual property rights and women reclaiming their work. For the first time since spring, I slept without dreams. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and cold air. October light filtered through the high windows, cutting across polished benches like blades. Elise arrived first, walking in with a confidence that bordered on theater. Her hair was perfect. her suit a careful shade of navy that whispered authority. Cameras clicked from the gallery as she waved politely, as if this were another one of her panels instead of a lawsuit for intellectual theft. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Morgan, my palms dry, my pulse oddly steady. Morgan leaned in and said softly, "Remember, this isn't about revenge. It's about truth landing where it should." I nodded, though a small part of me wanted the landing to hurt. The judge entered the room, rose, and the case began. Elise's lawyer opened with practiced sympathy. My client built her company through collaboration and family support. Misunderstandings have turned cooperation into conflict. I could almost admire the script. Elise sat with her hands folded, nodding at intervals. Then Morgan stood. Her voice carried a calm precision that cut through the room. "Your Honor, this case is about authorship proof and time. And unlike memory computers, keep time perfectly." She gestured to the monitor. Exhibit A. The screen flickered to life. The first video clip appeared taken from a private networking dinner Elise had attended months earlier. She was laughing, glass in hand, telling a group of people I copied her files. "She'll never find proof." Laughter rippled faintly in the recording. In the courtroom, it died instantly. Elise's eyes widened. "That's out of context," she said quickly, turning to the judge. Morgan didn't raise her voice. "Then let's hear the full context." She pressed play again. The next part of the recording played Elise's tone, smug and careless. Vanessa's too dumb to track metadata anyway. The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Elise's lawyer half rose, flustered, muttering something about privacy violation, but the judge lifted a hand. "Sit down," he said. The microphone in front of Elise wobbled, and then she did the unthinkable. She tried to laugh. It came out thin and nervous. "It was a joke," she said. "People joke about things they're proud of," Morgan replied, "not things they didn't do." She turned to the screen again. "And this," she said. Clicking to the next slide is the server log timestamped 2 minutes apart, proof of original authorship. The contrast was merciless. The numbers glowed bright white on black background, each line a small piece of quiet justice. The judge looked at Elise. "Do you dispute these records?" he asked. Elise hesitated, lips trembling. It's complicated," she said. Morgan replied, "Truth rarely is." The gallery rustled. I sat motionless, my throat tight, but my breathing even. For the first time in a year, I felt air that didn't taste of fear. The judge requested a recess. Reporters rushed outside to file their stories. Through the courtroom glass, I saw the headlines already forming on phones. Family feud turns into $10 million IP war. Elise sat, frozen, mascara-smudged eyes fixed on the table. When the recess ended, her lawyer whispered something, but she shook her head. She tried to recover her posture, shoulders back, chin high, but her hands trembled. Morgan presented the final evidence, a chain of emails showing Elise forwarding the copied files to CentraMed with my project's name replaced. The judge's verdict came an hour later. Elise had violated intellectual property law and falsified authorship claims, damages and legal fees to be determined. I didn't smile. I only closed my notebook and whispered, "It's done." Morgan packed the folders carefully. "Justice doesn't roar," she said. "Sometimes it just plays." As we left the courtroom, flashes erupted again, reporters shouting questions. Someone asked, "What's the worst thing you've heard said about you by someone who once said they loved you?" I didn't stop walking, but I answered quietly enough for one microphone to catch it, that I'd never notice. Outside, the sky had turned gray, heavy with rain. I tilted my face upward and let the first drops fall. The sound of them on the courthouse steps was the only applause I needed. December settled in quietly, a strange calm after a year of noise. The court ruling had come down 2 weeks earlier. Elise was ordered to repay $720,000 in damages, $150,000 in fines, and $40,000 in legal fees. The numbers looked clean on paper, almost clinical, but the truth underneath them was messy. I thought it would feel like victory. It felt more like exhaling after holding my breath too long. The checks started coming in, fragments, accounts, frozen assets, liquidated. She sold her house in Bellevue, the one she had boasted about buying with startup equity. A real estate listing described it as bright modern and newly available due to relocation. Relocation meant Tacoma, a small apartment near the freeway where she would have to hear traffic instead of applause. I didn't check on her. I didn't need to. Mom called the day the court finalized the payment schedule. Her voice was brittle with guilt. "Elise is going through enough," she said. "You don't need the money, sweetheart." I looked at the statement in front of me, the one showing the first transfer completed. "I earned it twice," I said calmly. "Once through work, once through betrayal." Mom sighed. Family shouldn't fight over numbers. Then she shouldn't have turned numbers into weapons. There was silence on the other end long enough that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The money arrived in increments wired through escrow, each payment a small echo of everything lost. I didn't spend it. It sat in a separate account labeled simply recovered. One night, Morgan called. Her voice had that dry humor I had come to depend on. "You officially own the patent again," she said. "Congratulations, Mrs. Quinn." I smiled faintly. "Feels strange hearing that word again. Ownership." She replied, "Justice often sounds strange at first. Give it time." After we hung up, I stared at the patent certificate she had mailed to me. It was thick paper with a gold seal. Nothing dramatic, just words and validation. I placed it in a frame and leaned it against the wall instead of hanging it. The truth didn't need to shout. A week later, an article appeared in the Seattle Post. The headline read, "From Sisterhood to Settlement, the $10 million Divide." It included photos of both of us side by side, cropped to look like mirror opposites. The journalist wrote that Elise was planning to start a consulting firm once she regained stability. I read that line 3 times and then closed the browser. Stability wasn't what she had lost. Credibility was. Around Christmas, I received a card from an unknown address. Inside was a single line written in familiar handwriting. "I hope you're happy now." No signature, no sentiment, just those 5 words. I folded it back into the envelope and dropped it in the recycling bin. Later that evening, while trimming my small apartment tree, I thought of the irony. She had taken so much from me, and yet what she gave back was clarity, the kind that can't be priced. I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window watching snow begin to fall. The city below shimmered under streetlights, quiet and indifferent. Somewhere out there, Elise was probably counting her losses, maybe even planning another reinvention. But reinvention doesn't erase record. It only rewrites shame into new packaging. I turned off the lights and let the room fill with the soft glow of the tree. Justice, I realized, isn't always loud or glorious. Sometimes it just arrives as stillness, followed by sleep. February came with gray skies and the kind of cold that seeps into bone. By then, I had rebuilt my work life into something quiet, efficient, and entirely mine. Rainfield Biotech had renewed my consulting contract, this time under my own name, and Morgan had helped me secure 3 new patents. I had peace, or at least the shape of it. Then one morning, a familiar name appeared in my inbox. The subject line read simply, "Opportunity." The sender was Elise. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The message began with forced professionalism, as if we were strangers. "Dear Vanessa, I am reaching out to see if your team might need freelance help. I am trying to rebuild and would appreciate a chance to contribute again. Best, Elise." I leaned back in my chair, reading the words again. There was no apology, no ownership of what she had done. Just a plea wrapped in politeness. I didn't delete it. Instead, I forwarded it to Morgan with a single sentence. "What do you think?" She replied within 10 minutes. "Depends how poetic you feel today." That evening, I replied to Elise. I said there might be temporary administrative work available for a short contract. I invited her to my downtown office the following week to discuss terms. She responded almost instantly. "Thank you, Vanessa. You won't regret it." I smiled faintly. I already didn't. The day she arrived, she looked smaller. The tailored confidence was gone. Her suit was outdated, her hair pulled into a nervous knot. She stood in the lobby clutching a folder and a coffee cup like shields. When I stepped out of my office, she tried to smile. "You look good," she said softly. "Success suits you." I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Let's get to work." I laid out a short-term contract, 2 weeks assistant position, hourly rate of $25. She read through the document carefully, her pride visibly wrestling with need. "This is fine," she said. "I'm just grateful for a start." I nodded, keeping my tone neutral. "You'll be helping with documentation, printing, filing, organizing patent materials," she said. "Whatever you need." For the next several days, she came in punctually, always polite, always careful. She fetched coffee, organized folders, printed documents without comment. Sometimes I caught her glancing at the framed patent certificate on my wall. She never mentioned it. The silence between us was thick, but functional. On the 9th day, I told her I needed a large print job. "It's a 50-page non-disclosure agreement," I said. "Make 2 copies and sign 1 for the file." She nodded obediently and took the flash drive from my hand. An hour later, she returned with the stack of papers, neatly bound her signature at the bottom of the last page. I looked up from my computer. "Good work," I said. She smiled faintly, clearly relieved to have done something right. I picked up the signed copy and placed it gently on the table between us. "You know," I said quietly, "you always wanted your name on my project." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" I turned the paper toward her, pointing to the signature line. "Now you have it." For a moment, she didn't move. Then the realization hit color draining from her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The silence in that room was more satisfying than any shout could have been. Finally, she whispered, "Vanessa, please." I didn't mean for things to go this far. I was desperate. I watched her hands tremble against the desk. "Desperation isn't an excuse," I said. "It's a choice you keep repeating." Tears filled her eyes. "I've lost everything. My friends, my reputation. I just wanted a chance to start over." I nodded slowly, walking to my drawer. "You did start over. Right here." I pulled out a small envelope and placed it on the table. Inside was a check for $2,000. "Payment for services rendered," I said evenly. "Your contract ends today." She looked at the check as if it were burning her fingers. "Is this really all that's left between us?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "No, Elise. What's left between us is nothing." She stood there for a long moment, shaking, then gathered her things and walked out. The door clicked softly behind her, quieter than I expected. I sat down and stared at the empty chair she had occupied, the air still carrying a faint trace of her perfume. I felt no triumph, just a clean kind of relief. Sometimes closure isn't a slam of the door, but the absence of one. Later that evening, Morgan texted me. "How did it go?" I sent her a photo of the signed NDA and the check stub beside it. She responded with a single line. "That's what poetic revenge looks like." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment she looked at her signature, the flicker of realization, the collapse of pretense. I had wanted justice. I had it. But it came with a surprising quiet. I stood by the window looking at the reflection of city lights in the glass. My own face looked calm, older maybe, but steadier. Elise's name was now printed at the bottom of a document that would never belong to her, a perfect symmetry. Before turning off the light, I whispered to myself, "Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's permission to move on." The next morning, I arrived at the office early. The air smelled of coffee and paper and something like peace. Her desk was empty, her keycard already deactivated. I slipped the signed NDA into a drawer and locked it away. Justice once again had chosen silence as its voice. May arrived with the kind of soft rain Seattle is known for, the kind that lingers rather than falls, brushing against glass like it has nowhere else to be. Life had returned to rhythm. My mornings began with coffee, quiet emails, and the hum of the city below. The noise of litigation, betrayal, and headlines had faded into something distant, almost fictional. The first week of the month, I wired $200,000 to a new fund called Women Who Fought Back. The foundation offered legal aid and mentorship to women facing workplace or family exploitation. Morgan joined the board as a consultant. When she called to thank me, I said simply, "It's not charity. It's repayment to the universe." She laughed softly. "Then you're officially debt-free." The following Sunday, the Seattle Post ran a feature titled, "Her Silence Became Her Weapon." The article traced the story from its beginning to now painting a picture of quiet endurance. I didn't recognize myself in every line, but the title felt right. Silence had been my sharpest tool, not the silence of fear, but of focus, the kind that lets truth speak for itself. Elise had moved away from Washington. The last I heard, she was working remotely for a small firm somewhere in Arizona. No apology came, no message, no attempt at reunion. I found I didn't need one. Some stories end not with reconciliation, but with distance that finally stops hurting. I kept the signed NDA in a locked drawer in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Every time I opened that drawer, I was reminded of what clarity costs and what it gives back. People sometimes asked me if I missed having a sister. I would answer honestly, I miss the version I thought I had. In May's second week, I attended the foundation's launch event at a renovated library downtown. The room was modest, filled with women from every field imaginable. Engineers, nurses, teachers, lawyers, all gathered under a banner that read, "Turning Pain into Power." When I was asked to say a few words, I hesitated at first, then walked up to the podium. The microphone smelled faintly of dust and metal. I used to think justice was loud. I said, my voice steady, that it meant applause or vindication. But sometimes justice is quiet. It's a signature, a line of code, a simple truth that refuses to disappear. Sometimes it just hits play. The audience stayed silent for a moment, then the applause rose slowly, not wild, but deep. I stepped down and looked around the room, faces glowing in the soft light. It struck me that none of us were defined by what had been taken from us. We were defined by what we rebuilt. After the event, I walked alone along the waterfront. The sky was bruised purple with evening clouds. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement like scattered stars. Somewhere behind me, the foundation volunteers were still packing up their laughter, faint but real. I thought about the long months that had brought me here. The fall, the courtroom, the paper trails, the signatures, the cold silences that had once felt unbearable. All of it had led to this stillness. My reflection in the glass window of a cafe looked like someone I was still getting to know. Not a victim, not even a victor, just someone who had survived with grace. When I reached my apartment, I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window. The patent certificate still leaned against the wall next to a framed photo of my team at Rainfield. Outside, rain shimmered under the streetlights, washing the city clean again. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to check my phone to track headlines or to look back. I just listened to the rain, and it sounded a lot like peace.